The winter of 1993 brought one of the coldest nights Chicago had seen in years. The temperature dropped to 15 degrees below zero, and the wind howled through the empty streets like a hungry wolf. Inside Fire Station 47, located in the suburban area of Morton Grove, firefighter James Collins sat at his desk, his hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. James wasn't like the other firefighters who preferred watching late-night TV shows during their night shifts. At 42 years old, with salt and pepper hair and kind brown eyes, he spent his quiet moments writing letters to his wife, Maria, who worked night shifts as a nurse at the local hospital. They had been married for 15 years, and this was their way of staying connected despite their opposite schedules. The station was oddly peaceful that night. The usual sounds filled the space, the soft snoring of firefighters resting in their bunks, the quiet hum of the heating system, and the occasional crackle of the radio. The large wall clock showed 11:45 p.m., and James was just thinking about heading to his bunk when everything changed. The peace shattered as the alarm blared through the station. Red lights flashed, and the dispatcher's voice came through clear and urgent. Residential fire reported at 1247 Maple Street, Victorian-style home. Reports of children trapped inside. Multiple calls received. James's heart jumped into his throat. In his 20 years as a firefighter, calls involving children were always the hardest. He moved with practiced speed, sliding into his gear as he had done thousands of times before. His movements were automatic. Boots first, then pants, jacket, helmet. Within seconds, he was climbing into Engine 47 alongside his team. As they raced through the empty streets, James could already see the orange glow in the sky. Captain Rodriguez, sitting in the front seat, briefed the team through their headsets. The house belongs to the Martinez family. Father works night shift at the factory. Mother called it in. She got out but couldn't reach her twin daughters on the third floor. Girls are 4 years old. The scene that greeted them was chaos. The old Victorian home, once beautiful with its intricate woodwork and tall windows, was now a blazing inferno. Flames shot out from the second-floor windows, and thick, black smoke poured from the third floor. On the snow-covered front lawn, a woman in a nightgown was being held back by police officers, screaming, "My babies! Please save my babies!" Mrs. Martinez, tears freezing on her face in the bitter cold, ran to James as soon as she saw him exit the truck. "Please," she grabbed his arm, her eyes wild with fear. "Sarah and Emma. They're in their bedroom, third floor, front of the house. They were sleeping when the fire started. I tried to go up, but the smoke." James nodded, his training taking over. "We'll get them, ma'am. I promise we'll do everything we can." He didn't make promises lightly, but something in the mother's eyes made him speak from his heart rather than his training manual. Captain Rodriguez quickly organized the response. "Collins, Martinez, you're going in for the girls. Johnson, get that ladder up to the third-floor window. Rivera, O'Brien, attack team, second floor. Let's move." James checked his oxygen tank and mask one final time. The bitter cold made the equipment slightly harder to handle, but his movements were sure and practiced. As he approached the burning house with his partner, he could feel the intense heat even through his protective gear. The front door was already open, letting out billowing smoke that turned the winter night even darker. Inside, the temperature was scorching. The first floor was filled with smoke, but the fire hadn't reached it yet. James and his partner moved quickly past family photos on the walls, happy moments now threatened by flames. The staircase creaked under their weight as they climbed, and James could hear the fire roaring above them like an angry beast. Just as they reached the second floor, a loud crash echoed through the house. Part of the ceiling had collapsed behind them, blocking their escape route. James kegged his radio. "Command, be advised, stairs are compromised. We're continuing to the third floor for the victims." In that moment, James didn't know that this ordinary night shift would become the most memorable one of his career. He didn't know that his next decisions would change not only his life, but the lives of many others for decades to come. All he knew was that somewhere above him, 2 little girls needed help, and time was running out. The heat on the third floor was unbearable. James and his partner moved carefully through the smoke-filled hallway, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The wooden floor beneath them felt weak, groaning with each step they took. Time was not on their side. "Fire department, call out if you can hear us," James shouted, his voice muffled by his oxygen mask. Only the crackling of flames answered him. The smoke was so thick he could barely see 3 feet ahead. James checked the first room, empty. The second room, also empty. His heart beat faster with each passing second. According to Mrs. Martinez, the twins' bedroom was at the front of the house. As they approached the last door, James noticed something pink hanging from the doorknob, a small heart-shaped sign that read Sarah and Emma's room. "This is it," he called to his partner. The door was hot to the touch, even through his gloves. James kicked it open, and a wave of thick smoke rolled out. Inside, the room was filled with the things little girls love: stuffed animals, fairy tale books, and pink curtains that were now turning black from the smoke. Through the darkness, James spotted 2 small beds. In one, he found Sarah, unconscious but still breathing. In the other, Emma lay curled up, also unresponsive. Both girls were in their matching pink pajamas, their faces covered in soot. James's training told him they didn't have much time left. Just then, his radio crackled to life. "Collins, the building structure is failing. You need to get out now." It was Captain Rodriguez's voice, filled with urgency. As if to confirm the captain's warning, a loud crash came from somewhere below. The whole house shuddered. James's partner, who was checking the hallway, shouted back, "The stairs are gone. The fire's eaten through them completely." James looked at the window, then at the 2 small girls. He had only moments to make a decision. His own daughter Katie was the same age as these twins. He couldn't leave them behind. "Martinez," he called to his partner, "get the rescue ladder to the window. I'm bringing both girls." His partner's voice was shocked. "Both? That's against protocol. Take one, I'll take the other." But another crash from below made the decision final. There wasn't time for 2 trips. The floor beneath them was starting to sink. James quickly wrapped Sarah in his left arm, securing her tightly against his chest with a rescue strap. Then he did the same with Emma on his right side. The girls were light, but carrying both made moving difficult. The window was their only escape route. James could see the rescue ladder extending up from the ground, but it was still 10 feet away from the window. The flames were now entering the room, eating away at the children's books and toys. "Command, this is Collins," he spoke into his radio. "I'm attempting a double rescue rappel. Both victims secured. Stand by with medical." Without waiting for a response, James attached his rappelling line to the window frame. He tested it twice, knowing 3 lives depended on this single rope. The freezing wind whipped at his face as he looked down. 3 stories below, he could see the ambulance lights flashing and his fellow firefighters gathering with rescue nets. James took a deep breath. He had practiced rappelling hundreds of times in training, but never with 2 victims. He said a quick prayer, tightened his grip on the twins, and stepped out into the empty air. The descent was rough. The extra weight made controlling their speed difficult. Halfway down, a burst of flames from a second-floor window caught his rope, weakening it. James felt the line give way slightly, and they dropped faster than he planned. He twisted his body to take the impact, protecting the girls with his own body. They hit the ground hard. James felt a sharp pain in his leg and burning sensation across his back, but he held onto the twins. Immediately, paramedics rushed forward, taking Sarah and Emma from his arms. As they carried the girls to the waiting ambulance, James collapsed onto the snow-covered ground. Through his fading consciousness, he heard someone say the girls were breathing. They had a pulse. They would live. Only then did James allow himself to feel the pain from his injuries. His last thought before passing out was of the photo in his wallet. His own daughter Katie, who would be proud that her daddy had saved 2 girls just like her. Above them, the old Victorian house continued to burn, but its most precious treasures were safe, thanks to a firefighter who chose to break protocol and listen to his heart instead. The emergency room of Chicago Memorial Hospital buzzed with activity in the early hours of that winter morning. Doctors and nurses moved quickly between 3 rooms, 2 containing the twin girls, Sarah and Emma Martinez, and one holding their rescuer, firefighter James Collins. Dr. Wilson, the head of emergency medicine, checked on the twins first. Both girls were breathing on their own now, their small chests rising and falling steadily. The oxygen masks on their faces made them look even tinier than their 4 years. Their mother, Mrs. Martinez, sat between their beds, holding one small hand from each daughter, her prayers mixing with her tears. "Your daughters are very lucky. Dr. Wilson told Mrs. Martinez gently. They mainly suffered from smoke inhalation, but we caught it in time. A few more minutes in that smoke. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what could have happened. Down the hall, in room 115, James wasn't as fortunate. The doctors found 3 cracked ribs, severe burns across his back where his protective gear had been damaged, and a broken leg from the impact of the landing. His wife Maria, still in her nurse's uniform from her own shift, sat beside his bed, her face showing both worry and pride. The local news crews gathered outside the hospital, eager to tell the story of the brave firefighter who had saved twin girls from a burning building. But James, even in his pain-medicated state, refused to talk to reporters. "I just did my job," he kept saying, his voice rough from the smoke he had inhaled. Captain Rodriguez visited later that morning, bringing James' wallet and phone from the station. "You broke every safety protocol in the book," the captain said, trying to sound stern but failing to hide his smile. "But you saved those girls. The department's calling it the Christmas miracle, even though Christmas is still 2 weeks away." James spent the next week in the hospital. The burns on his back needed special treatment, and his broken leg was set in a cast that would keep him off duty for at least 3 months. His fellow firefighters visited every day, bringing him updates about the Martinez family and the girls' recovery. Sarah and Emma were released from the hospital after 3 days. Before leaving, they came to James's room with their parents. The girls were shy at first, hiding behind their mother's legs, but then Emma stepped forward and handed James a crayon drawing. It showed a man in a red firefighter suit holding 2 little girls, with wings drawn on his back like an angel. "Thank you for saving us, Mr. James," Sarah whispered, while Emma nodded in agreement. Their father, who had been at work during the fire, couldn't stop shaking James's hand, tears in his eyes. But life has a way of moving forward, even after miraculous events. The Martinez family's house was completely destroyed in the fire. Their insurance company helped them find a temporary apartment, but Mr. Martinez had recently been offered a better job in California. With nothing holding them back in Chicago anymore, they decided to make the move. The day before they left for California, Mrs. Martinez brought the twins to the hospital one last time. James was preparing to be discharged himself. She handed him an envelope with their new address in San Francisco and a family photo of them taken before the fire. "We'll write to you," she promised. "The girls will never forget what you did." But as often happens with life's twists and turns, addresses change, letters get lost, and over time, the connection faded. The local paper ran one final story about the rescue, calling James a true hero. The article included a photo of him in his hospital bed, the twins hugging him carefully while their parents looked on. The story moved to the back pages, then disappeared altogether as new news took its place. James returned to work 3 months later, his leg healed but his back still bearing the scars of that night. He kept the crayon drawing in his locker at the station and the family photo in his wallet. Sometimes, on quiet night shifts, he would look at them and wonder how the twins were doing in their new life in California. What he didn't know then was that this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of a much longer tale that would take 30 years to complete. Sometimes the bravest acts create ripples that travel through time, connecting lives in ways we could never imagine. Time moved forward like a river, carrying everyone along its steady flow. The year 1993 became 2000, then 2010, and finally 2023. 30 years brought many changes to all the lives touched by that winter night's fire. In sunny San Francisco, the Martinez twins grew from scared little girls into confident young women. Though they looked identical with their dark hair and brown eyes, Sarah and Emma took slightly different paths in life. Both girls were drawn to medicine, but in different ways. Sarah, who was the quieter twin, found her calling in pediatric surgery. Perhaps it was the memory of being saved as a child that made her want to help other children. In the operating room, her steady hands never shook, even during the most difficult surgeries. Her colleagues called her the child whisperer because of how well she worked with young patients. Emma became a burn care specialist, choosing to help people who had been hurt by fire. She remembered little about the night of the fire, but the story her parents told her countless times shaped her future. In her office, she kept a framed newspaper clipping about their rescue, though the paper had yellowed with age. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, James Collins's life had taken its own turns. After recovering from his injuries, he served another 15 years as a firefighter. The scars on his back never fully faded, and cold weather made his once broken leg ache, but he never regretted his decision that night. In 2008, James retired from firefighting. With his savings and pension, he opened a small hardware store in his neighborhood. The store became a favorite spot for local firefighters who would stop by for supplies and stay to hear James's stories from his firefighting days. His favorite story, the one he rarely told, was about saving the twin girls. James's family grew over the years. His daughter Katie, who had been 4 when he saved the twins, grew up to become a high school teacher. She married young and gave James 3 grandchildren. His wife Maria retired from nursing but volunteered at the local hospital's gift shop. Their life was simple but happy. Every December, around the anniversary of the fire, James would take out the old photo of the Martinez family and the crayon drawing the twins had made. Sometimes he wondered what had happened to those little girls. Had they grown up happy? Were they successful? Did they remember him? What James didn't know was that the twins thought about him too. They had tried searching for him online a few times over the years, but without much luck. There were too many James Collinses in Chicago, and social media wasn't much help with someone of his generation. The twins kept their own reminders of that night. In Sarah's office at San Francisco General Hospital, she had a small fire truck on her desk. When young patients asked about it, she would tell them about the brave firefighter who had saved her life. Emma kept the newspaper article about their rescue in her office, sharing the story with burn patients to give them hope during their recovery. Life went on this way, with these families living separate lives on opposite sides of the country. James ran his hardware store, played with his grandchildren, and slowly grew older. The twins built successful medical careers, saving other lives as they had once been saved. None of them knew that fate was about to bring their paths together again. The same universe that had joined them on that freezing winter night 30 years ago wasn't finished with their story yet. Because sometimes life works in circles. A brave act doesn't just save lives. It creates connections that last forever, waiting for the right moment to be discovered again. And for James Collins and the Martinez twins, that moment was coming sooner than any of them could imagine. Looking back, these 30 years were just the middle of their story. The next chapter would begin with a medical emergency, a desperate search for help, and a chance meeting that would prove that no good deed is ever truly forgotten. The morning James Collins learned about his daughter Katie's illness started like any other day. He opened his hardware store at 8 o'clock, helped customers find the right tools, and chatted with the regulars who came in for coffee. But everything changed when he got the phone call at noon. "Dad," Katie's voice was shaking on the phone. "Can you and Mom come to the hospital? The doctors. They found something." James closed the store early that day, something he had never done before. At Chicago Memorial Hospital, the same place where James had recovered from his injuries 30 years ago, doctors explained Katie's condition. She had a rare genetic disease that was affecting her heart. The medical name was long and complicated, but the simple truth was scary enough. Katie needed a special kind of surgery, and soon. The problem, Dr. Roberts explained to the family, is that only a few surgeons in the country can perform this operation. It's very complicated because of where the problem is in Katie's heart. He handed them a list of hospitals that might be able to help. James and Maria spent weeks calling hospitals all over the country. Most said no, some didn't even call back. Katie got weaker, and James felt helpless. This wasn't like a fire where he could rush in and save someone. All he could do was watch his daughter suffer and keep trying to find help. Then one day, Maria burst into the hardware store waving a letter. "San Francisco General Hospital," she exclaimed. "They have a surgeon who's done this surgery before. They're willing to take Katie's case." The next few days were a blur of activity. James closed his store temporarily, leaving it in the care of his assistant manager. They bought plane tickets, packed bags, and prepared for a long stay in San Francisco. Katie was both scared and hopeful. Her 3 children stayed with their father, promising to video chat every day. When they arrived at San Francisco General Hospital, the nurse at the front desk directed them to the pediatric surgical department. "Dr. Martinez will see you shortly," she said. James wasn't really paying attention to the doctor's name. He was too busy helping Katie into a wheelchair and making sure Maria had all their paperwork. They waited in a bright office filled with children's artwork and, strangely, a small toy fire truck on the desk. The door opened, and a woman in a white coat walked in. She was around 40 years old, with dark hair and kind brown eyes. She smiled as she looked at their paperwork. "I'm Dr. Sarah Martinez," she said. "I'll be evaluating Katie's case." Something about the name made James look up sharply. Martinez? Where had he heard that name recently? But his mind was too full of worry about Katie to think clearly. Dr. Martinez began explaining the surgery in simple terms they could understand. She had done this procedure 5 times before, all successful. As she talked, she occasionally glanced at James with a slightly puzzled expression, as if trying to remember something. Then she picked up the medical history form and read James's full name. Her hands started trembling slightly. "James Collins?" she asked. "From Chicago? Were you ever a firefighter?" James nodded, still not understanding. Dr. Martinez walked to her desk and picked up the small fire truck. "I keep this here," she said softly, "to remind me of the firefighter who saved my sister and me from a burning house when we were 4 years old." The room went completely quiet. James stared at her, memories from that winter night 30 years ago flooding back. "Sarah?" he whispered. "Little Sarah Martinez." Tears filled Dr. Martinez's eyes as she nodded. "You carried my sister Emma and me out of that fire," she said. "You broke your leg saving us. I told that story to scared children in this hospital hundreds of times." Maria, who had heard the story of the twins many times over the years, gasped. Katie looked between her father and her doctor in amazement. And James just sat there, unable to speak, as the past and present came together in an incredible way. What were the chances? Out of all the hospitals in the country, they had found their way to one of the little girls he had saved so long ago. And now, that same little girl had grown up to become the doctor who might save his daughter. Time seemed to stand still in Dr. Sarah Martinez's office. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, making the small fire truck on her desk shine. James Collins sat there, his hands shaking slightly, as 30 years of memories rushed through his mind. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and tried to stay professional, but her voice trembled as she spoke. "I still have the newspaper article," she said, opening her desk drawer. She pulled out a carefully preserved clipping, its edges yellow with age. The black and white photo showed a younger James in a hospital bed with 2 small girls hugging him. Katie wheeled her chair closer to look at the old photograph. "Dad," she said softly, "that's the picture you keep in your wallet." James nodded, pulling out his own worn copy of the same photo. He had carried it with him every day for 30 years. Maria, who had heard the story of the twins countless times, was the first to break the emotional silence. "What happened to your sister?" she asked. "Emma, right?" Sarah's face lit up. "You remember her name. Emma is actually here in San Francisco, too. She's a burn care specialist at the University Hospital across town." She picked up her phone. "I need to call her right now. She won't believe this." As Sarah dialed her sister's number, James found his voice again. "The drawing," he said. "The crayon drawing you girls made for me in the hospital. I still have it in my locker at the hardware store." "The one with the angel wings?" Sarah asked, smiling through her tears. "Emma and I argued about those wings. I wanted to draw a cape instead, but she insisted firefighters were more like angels than superheroes." The phone rang 3 times before Emma answered. "Sarah, I'm between patients." "What's up?" "Emma, you need to come to my office right now," Sarah said, her voice excited. "Remember how Mom and Dad always told us about the firefighter who saved us? The one who carried both of us out of the fire?" There was a pause on the other end. "Of course I remember. Mr. Collins. Why? He's sitting in my office right now. His daughter Katie needs the special heart surgery, and they were referred to me. Can you believe it?" They could hear Emma gasp through the phone. "Don't let him leave. I'll be there in 20 minutes. While they waited for Emma, Sarah showed them more treasures from her desk drawer. She had kept everything related to that night. Newspaper clippings, the hospital discharge papers, even a small piece of her burned pajamas that her mother had saved. "We tried to find you over the years," Sarah explained. "But there were so many James Collinses in Chicago, and we weren't sure if you still lived there. Mom and Dad still talk about you at every Christmas dinner." Katie, despite her illness, was fascinated by the story unfolding before her. "So that's why you became a doctor?" she asked Sarah. Sarah nodded. "Both Emma and I That night showed us how one person could change someone's whole life. We wanted to do the same for others. Exactly 19 minutes later, the office door burst open. Emma Martinez rushed in, still wearing her doctor's coat. She looked almost exactly like Sarah, but her hair was shorter, and she wore glasses. She stopped in the doorway, staring at James. "Mr. Collins," she whispered, then rushed forward to hug him. James stood up carefully, his old leg injury making him move slowly. The twins he had saved were now the same height as him, but as he hugged them both, he could still remember them as those tiny 4-year-old girls in pink pajamas. "Our mom is going to cry when we tell her," Emma said, wiping her own tears. "She still prays for you every night, you know. She never forgot what you did." Maria took pictures of the reunion on her phone. James with the twins, now successful doctors, all of them crying and laughing at the same time. In one photo, Sarah and Emma stood on either side of James, recreating the pose from the old newspaper clipping. But this wasn't just a reunion. It was also the beginning of something new. As they shared this emotional moment, none of them knew that this amazing coincidence would lead to even more incredible events in the days to come. After the emotional reunion in Sarah's office, both Martinez twins switched into professional mode. Emma pulled up a chair next to her sister's desk, and they began reviewing Katie's medical files together. James, Maria, and Katie watched as the two doctors talked in quiet, serious voices. "The genetic condition is affecting her heart," Sarah explained, pointing to Katie's test results. "But there's something else that makes this case special." She looked at Emma meaningfully. Emma nodded, studying the papers carefully through her glasses. "The condition has created unusual scar tissue around the heart. That's actually my specialty, dealing with complicated scar tissue. This might be why other hospitals turned the case down." Katie squeezed her father's hand nervously. "What does that mean for me?" she asked. The twins shared a look that only identical sisters could understand. Then Sarah smiled warmly at Katie. "It means you're incredibly lucky. Emma and I have never worked together on a surgery before, but this case needs both our skills." "Think of it this way," Emma added, seeing the worried looks on everyone's faces. "Sarah is one of the best pediatric surgeons in the country. She knows exactly how to fix the genetic problem, and I know how to handle the scar tissue safely. Together, we can help you." James felt tears forming in his eyes. "30 years ago, I carried you both to safety," he said softly. "And now you're both here to help save my daughter." Sarah reached for the small fire truck on her desk. "All these years, I've kept this here to remind me of how someone's brave action can change lives forever. Now it's our turn to help." The next few days were filled with more tests and preparations. Emma moved all her other cases to other doctors so she could focus completely on Katie's surgery. Sarah canceled her vacation plans. Both sisters stayed late at the hospital every night, planning every detail of the complicated operation. They also spent time getting to know the Collins family better. During lunch breaks, they shared stories about their lives. The twins told Katie about growing up in California, about their parents who had recently retired to Florida, and about how that night in the fire had shaped their whole lives. "Our mom kept everything from that night," Emma said. "The newspaper articles, our burned pajamas, even the smoke-damaged teddy bear. She said we needed to remember how precious life is." One evening, Sarah and Emma's parents called from Florida. When James spoke to them on video chat, Mrs. Martinez cried happy tears. "We never forgot you," she said. "Not a single day." Mr. Martinez just kept saying thank you over and over. The day before the surgery, both sisters came to Katie's hospital room. Emma brought her special equipment for dealing with the scar tissue, while Sarah reviewed the surgical plan one last time. They had practiced the procedure multiple times in the surgical simulation lab. "I've worked with other surgeons before," Sarah told Katie, "but tomorrow will be special. Emma and I have always been in sync. We're twins after all. We can almost read each other's minds in normal life. In the operating room, that connection will be even more important." Emma touched the small fire truck that Sarah had brought from her office. "Tomorrow will be like Mr. Collins was that night," she said. "He didn't think twice about saving both of us, even though it was against the rules. Tomorrow, both of us will work together to save you." That night, as James sat by Katie's bedside while she slept, he looked out the hospital window at the San Francisco lights. He remembered that cold Chicago night 30 years ago, how the fire had lit up the winter sky, how scared he had been carrying two little girls down the side of a burning building. Those little girls were now brilliant doctors, working together to save his daughter. Life had drawn a perfect circle, bringing them all back together when they needed each other most. As he watched Katie sleeping peacefully, James whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust others to be as brave as you once were. Tomorrow, he would have to do just that. The morning of Katie's surgery arrived with a beautiful San Francisco sunrise. James and Maria arrived at the hospital early, their hearts full of hope and worry. In the pre-operation room, Katie looked small in her hospital gown, just like the Martinez twins had looked in their burned pajamas 30 years ago. Dr. Sarah and Dr. Emma Martinez arrived together, already in their surgical scrubs. They had been at the hospital since dawn, reviewing everything one final time. The sisters looked confident and calm, their matching brown eyes showing the same determination James had felt on that winter night long ago. "Ready?" Sarah asked Katie gently, checking her vital signs. "Ready," Katie answered, trying to smile bravely. She hugged her parents, holding them a little longer than usual. Her 3 children had sent a video message from Chicago, telling their mom to be strong and that they loved her. Before they took Katie to surgery, Emma pulled something from her pocket. It was the old newspaper clipping about the fire rescue. "We're keeping this in the operating room with us today," she said, "to remind us that miracles do happen." James hugged both sisters before they left. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice shaking, "for everything." Sarah touched the small fire truck charm she had pinned to her scrubs. "No, thank you," she replied, "for giving us the chance to be here today." The surgery lasted 8 hours. James and Maria sat in the waiting room, holding hands and trying to stay strong. Every time the operating room doors opened, they looked up hopefully, but it was never news about Katie. Finally, in the late afternoon, both Martinez sisters appeared, looking tired but happy. The surgery was successful, Sarah announced, while Emma nodded, smiling. "Katie's heart is beating strongly, and the scar tissue responded perfectly to our treatment." The news spread quickly. Katie's children jumped with joy when they heard on video chat. The Martinez parents called from Florida, crying happy tears again. Even some of James' old firefighter friends from Chicago called to celebrate when they heard the news. Over the next week, Katie recovered steadily. The Martinez sisters visited her room every day, checking her progress carefully. They brought old photos from their childhood, sharing stories about their lives after the fire. Katie's children flew to San Francisco with their father, filling the hospital room with laughter and love. 2 weeks later, Katie was strong enough to leave the hospital. On her last day, the hospital staff organized a small party. Someone had told the local news about the incredible story, how a firefighter who saved twin girls 30 years ago had his own daughter saved by those same twins, now successful doctors. Reporters asked James how it felt. "Life works in amazing ways," he said, watching Sarah and Emma take a photo with Katie. 30 years ago, I was just doing my job. I never imagined those little girls would grow up to save my daughter." The Martinez sisters had their own thoughts to share. "We became doctors because we wanted to save lives, just like Mr. Collins saved ours," Sarah explained. Emma added, "Working together to help Katie felt like completing a circle that started in that fire 30 years ago." Before leaving the hospital, Katie gave both doctors a special gift, a custom-made necklace for each, with a tiny fire truck charm. "To add to your collection," she said, hugging them both. "And to remember that good deeds really do come back in wonderful ways." James took one last photo of everyone together, his family and the Martinez sisters, all smiling, all connected by an incredible chain of events that started on a cold winter night in Chicago 30 years before. As they left the hospital, James looked back at the Martinez twins standing in their white coats. Once, they had been 2 scared little girls he carried from a burning building. Now they were brilliant doctors who had saved his daughter. Sometimes the greatest gifts in life come full circle, he thought, in ways we could never imagine. The story made national headlines, reminding people that heroes come in many forms, sometimes as brave firefighters, sometimes as skilled doctors, and sometimes as little girls who grow up to repay an act of courage in the most beautiful way possible. And somewhere in Chicago, in an old fire station, they added one more photo to their wall of heroic rescues, this time showing not just one brave act, but 2, separated by 30 years but connected by love, courage, and the endless possibility of hope.